Welcome, wargamers and adventurers alike, to the cursed streets of the mortal realms as we explore the latest installment in the Warhammer Quest series of games, Cursed City. Now, this is a game that I have been so excited to see released, and I'm absolutely in love with the setting that they've created for it. And so today, we're going to set the stage for this narrative by speaking about the Cursed City itself, Ulfenkarn. Now, I'll say up front, if this is your first time joining me on the channel, first of all, very much welcome to you. I have playlists centered around every faction and campaign in the AOS setting, and so I'll be referencing some of those as I kind of talk about the events that make this city what it is. And so if you want to learn more about those, I will have the links to those playlists in the description down below. But coming back to our core topic, what is the city of Ulfenkarn, and why are we drawn into it? And so for me, personally, as to why I am so drawn to this narrative, is that it is a tale of two stories, two concurrent stories going on. You see, whenever you engage in a game of Warhammer Quest Cursed City, you're treading through two different timelines, right? There's the story of how a once gleaming and noble city came to be such a den of death and despair. And then there's the narrative that you and your other party members are actively playing through as you fight desperately to purge the city of the darkness that has overtaken it. One's in the past, the other is current, and I absolutely love it. Everything about this is dripping with, well, it used to be X, but now it's been twisted and corrupted into Y. And so as you kind of go through the city, you're piecing together what it used to be like and how things fell apart. And so let's talk about that past story, right, of a great city plunged into darkness. And that story begins far back in the Age of Myth. It's a time of legend and greatness where mortals were prosperous to the highest degree. They spread wide, casting these vast architectural and engineering feats that would baffle the mind. And while the exact dates have been lost to history at some point back in the Age of Myth, 3 Azurite families, meaning just 3 prominent rich families from the realm of heavens, Azir, set out to establish a fortress in Shyish, the realm of death, on a small craggy island known as Sorgarond. These noble families were the houses of Alton, Vosheim, and Gaunt, and they erected a grand citadel on this island. Now, the specifics are a bit unclear as to why they specifically chose this place in a different realm, but given what we know about other cities of Sigmar, which is the closest equal that we have in our current understanding of the setting, it could easily have been to control trade in the region, act as a lighthouse and a massive port, and so on. It's actually located in a very stable, safe, and prominent part of Shyish, so it would make sense for them to look at setting up a harbor town. Because understand that no matter which realm you're in Age of Sigmar as a setting, the center of it is where magics are the weakest. In fact, the center of any realm would look pretty much very similar to any traditional Tolkien-esque fantasy setting that many are used to. It's only when you get out to the edges of a realm that things get real weird and magic becomes unstable. My point is, given that they had a reason to build here, it's not a bad location. And what started as a simple citadel with a few peasant hunts kind of surrounding it quickly blossomed into a thriving metropolis, which those founders had dubbed the city of Mournhold. City of lights, city of magic. For anyone who gets that reference, +1 to you. This would be a place of commerce, fishing, trade, and nobility, and we get the sense that this was a people who deeply respected lineage and inheritance, right? The 3 noble houses who founded it ruled over it in a very honorable way. And it kind of seemed like this little picturesque fantasy kingdom. But as I am always quick to point out, the setting is not called Peacehammer Quest Chill City, because when Age of Chaos came following the Age of Myth, no place in the mortal realms was safe. The chaos invasion into Shyish was particularly brutal for a few reasons. Archaon the Ever-Chosen, who's a big bad from the main story arc, struck down the god of undeath, Nagash, who he didn't die permanently, he just needed time to kind of put himself back together. But while he was doing that, his realm fell into ruin, and the forces of chaos ran rampant. Any towns or cities full of the living or the dead, because they do have undead that are good and they live amongst mortals. All of them were purged and annihilated. Right? Entire underworlds of Shyish were corrupted and wiped away. And the city of Mournhold was not immune either. You see, for several seasons, the denizens of the city stood defiant against their chaos invaders. Several armies were pushed back, but there was always another one right behind it. And that kind of repetition of siege and then being able to rebuild a little bit, that kind of kept going until the coming of Slaw the Ravener. A demon prince of Khorne, the god of blood and murder, set his sights on Mournhold, and he set to a long, protracted siege that lasted several seasons, whittling down the defenses of the city and starving its people slowly. Things were desperate after so long a siege, the people were hungry, the walls were falling apart, and hope seemed lost. It seemed as if Mournhold was going to turn into the myriad and countless number of other cities that fell during the Age of Chaos, and that is until a fleet of ships bearing black sails tore onto the scene with blinding speed. Now, at this point, the people of Mournhold were just like, oh, fun, awesome, yet more chaos marauders, and they were basically all but defeated. They're like ready to throw the towel in. But when this fleet came in a single swoop, they smashed into the Khorne armies of Slann. Undead troops marched with hulking ogres led by a soul-blight vampire named Radjikar the Wolf. And though it was a brutal fight, Radjikar was able to slay Slann, that's a fun thing to say, and in doing so became the inadvertent savior of the city of Mournhold. So try to imagine this if you're one of these peasants, right? Your defenses are crumbling around you, you're about to collapse internally, and then all of a sudden a vampire and a whole bunch of undead along with his ogre pals comes and just sweeps your enemy under the rug. It's a weird day. I mean, I guess it's probably not that weird for Shyish, but it's a weird day for you and I. Now at this point, the vampire, Radjikar, turned and walked to the gates of the city, and he kind of had his hands open. He was coming as a diplomat rather than a conqueror, and he made an offer to the nobility of Mournhold. And so this was that deal. Let Radjikar the Wolf into the city and establish him as a ruling noble house. So there's 3 noble houses, make him the 4th. And give him a few sacrifices regularly of blood and that kind of stuff to keep him and his thralls fed. And in exchange, they'll defend the city through the long night that was the Age of Chaos. Now, this put the city's rulers in a tough spot. Their army was meager and broken, and the Age of Chaos showed no signs of slowing down, and so he offered something that they desperately needed. On the other side, from Radjikar the Wolf's perspective, we learned that the Age of Chaos was hard on him too. This was not a decision that he wanted to make, that basically it robbed him of his source of food. Normally, a vampire would just kind of go around and feast upon mortals and do whatever they want to do at their own whim, but the Chaos armies weren't any good for eating. Their corrupted blood became revolting to him as a vampire. And not only that, these Chaos armies were going around slaughtering or incorporating and absorbing all the mortals that he was hunting for food. He's starving. So on the surface, this is a completely reasonable deal, right? I need food, you need protection. And with that understanding, the leaders invited the wolf into their midst and established Radjikar as the 4th ruling line of nobility. He took that giant original monolithic citadel that overlooked the city as his own because, who's going to argue with him? He's now the ruler of all their military, essentially, and he established himself very well. And the city stayed like this for some time. Radjikar would get regular offerings of blood, or if there was like a criminal that was condemned to death, they would just literally give it to Radjikar to eat. And in exchange, the city was defended against the forces of chaos. And this kind of symbiosis that could only happen in Age of Sigmar, the wolf and his sheep lived in relative harmony. And that's kind of the reason one of the many reasons I love this setting. It just creates ridiculous situations to make these very plausible, give and takes between different societies. Even the coming of Sigmar's storm, when the Stormcast Eternals were unleashed to purge chaos from the realms, it did little to change this. Things didn't, really radically alter for them. The Age of Chaos was over, but the relationship between Radukar and the mortals of Mournhold held strong. Again, it was going to take a long time for the people to repopulate enough for Radukar to be able to just kind of go out and eat wherever he wants again. And I imagine as, representative from the Stormcast Eternals would start interacting with this city, it didn't hurt his case that he was an accepted part of the society. And I think that was definitely a ploy that he had of just like, if they integrate me into their government, then they can't turn on me at some point. And so that's how, this vampire established himself within a society. But then things changed yet again. Nagash, the god of undeath, made his power play for the fate of the mortal realms. This is a huge campaign that hit Age of Sigmar, the full army game, in a way where he basically did a magic ritual that messed up all magic around the realms. I've talked about it a whole bunch. I'm going to put a link to the playlist down below, but in short, he inverted the realm of death, where this was all located. You see, where things were most stable in the center and crazy at the edges, this ritual that he enacted brought all that crazy death magic to himself, specifically into a singular point that he calls the Shyish Nadir. And this dramatically changed the landscape of the city. You see, where death magic was once scarce in the area where Mournhold was, now it's swelled beyond measure because now it's so much closer. They are very close to the dead center of the realm, and now that is the focal point of all the extreme magic in Shyish. And for Radukar and his kin, a great sense of power and invigoration washed over them, as the city of Mournhold sits near the edges of the Shyish Nadir. The days of chaos had ended. Now death reigned supreme. And it was this shift in power that would forever damn the city of Mournhold. Now, the change didn't happen necessarily instantaneously. There were a few dramatic offensives that happened overnight in some instances, but for the most part, things take time. This big swelling of death magic from the Nadir meant that night now belonged to the howling geists and the creatures of darkness. Undead were seen with a lot of regularity, swelling in numbers by the day. All the while, Radukar was making his own moves. He was offering the Blood Kiss, which is basically it's the GW way of saying like you turn someone into a vampire, to select members of nobility amongst his rivals. He could play the long game. He's an immortal. All these, humans that he has to work with, the other three founding nobility houses, they are going to come and go. But he had been in Mournhold for generations, and so now he began to draw members of the court into his corner. All the while, the city started to grow darker in nature. Bodies were strewn across the streets each night. Radukar and his kind feasted on mortals openly. They purged the rulers of the other noble houses and asserted total control over the city. And once that was done, once he had basically, drained the life from all his competition in terms of, people who realistically could stand against him, he renamed the city of Mournhold Ulfenkarn, which translates to the Wolf's Feast. Now, much of the core city, so you would think of the kind of suburbs immediately around downtown, are largely empty, save for undead thralls and wicked beasts that come out at night. Radukar still looms in his big, towering black fortress overlooking the entire city. But life is still happening here, however gloom and dour. Mournhold, now Ulfenkarn, was truly a massive settlement. There are several thousands of residents, I'd imagine, which now largely live on the outskirts of the city. Radukar rules with an iron fist, but he's not into outright slaughter, because remember, he still wants them for food, and killing them all at once serves no purpose. And so I just want to make it clear that he's not just out slaughtering humans because he hates humans. He's farming them, so he's letting them have their little society. It just is always going to be shrouded in this very dour and super messed up dark kind of cloud. So he's not merciful at all. I can't stress that enough. Exsanguination, or the draining of blood, is now the punishment for every crime, even the smallest of offenses. Someone can be killed outright. Others are torturously drained of their blood for days or weeks. And so it's just everything is about blood. He's literally leeching off of the citizens of the city. So now the once noble city sits in darkness. Now, some people saw this coming and failed to stop it. Others have just learned about this huge nest of vampires and have come to eradicate it. And that's where the adventures of you and I come into play, as an unlikely band of adventurers attempting to end the rule of Radjikar and his kin, those terrible minions that he's instated as the keepers of his kingdom. Now, there are a ton of reasons of why I love this story and why it's so cool, and I'm going to come right back to those after a quick word from today's sponsor. Hey Wargamers, Doug here, and I want to talk to you about a crazy awesome book that you can use to create some exciting locations for your heroes and your stories. Spectacular Settlements breaks down how to build the most engaging locations, and while it's certainly designed for role-playing games, and it is role-playing game agnostic, you can use it in any one that you want, from D&D to Soulbound, it also has a lot of really great uses for Age of Sigmar. Whether you're designing a bastion of chaos, a city of Sigmar, or just a rugged settlement of destruction out in the wastes, this book walks you through how to design a city, and I mean design a city with its culture, its history, its physical appearance all in mind. There's so much inside this book to help you really flesh out all of the minor details of your city and really bring it to life. It's a fabulous tool for creating unique environments for both your narrative as well as any games that you might be bringing players into. So if you want some dazzling locations for your City of Sigmar, your Soulbound crew, or any other role-playing game, check out Spectacular Settlements in the description down below. Now back to the show. So as I end all my videos, why is this so cool? Now, as I said, there are two stories here happening at once, right? The one that you and I play, and the whole essentially civil war that took place beforehand. And I love the story here, right? The Age of Chaos, when Age of Sigmar first launched, was very black and white, okay? You lived or you died. Entire cities were just leveled, or they made it through somehow. But this throws in a bit of gray. Mournhold didn't have a choice. They needed each other, Mournhold and Radjikar, to survive. But the moment that dynamic shifted, when Radjikar didn't need them, he seized power. And keep in mind, for all the people who would probably say, well, why would you ever trust him or let him into your midst? Remember, for hundreds of years, he kept his word and was actually super cool. So that's the problem, is there was no way for anyone to have seen what Nagash was going to do with the Necroquake and making Shyish all kinds of crazy. So it's not super unreasonable. It's just the kind of thing that's this dynamic works for now, but I feel like someone should have saw something coming. I want to read books of people who conspired and betrayed and fell for Radjikar, to follow that tale, right? I will do videos of all the characters involved with this game. I'm going to do a video certainly of all the villains, and then one depicting all the heroes that we can play as. But what's great is that most of the villains, at least, actually just most of the characters in general, they all have some part to play in this drama. Some of the heroes are descendants of the original nobility that let Radjikar in, and that guy's pretty cool. Some of them are priestesses that saw this coming, were like, you have to stop, get him out of here, and no one listened to her. Meanwhile, all the villains had a role before things went to hell, and so we get to see their story get twisted and get darker, and I absolutely love that stuff. Now, the location of the city is extremely important. I tried to highlight that a little bit earlier, but it's right off the side of Ossia. I'll put a little map up here, and that's very important lore-wise if you are following Age of Sigmar lore. Lots of important events happen here. You see, most recently, I did a coverage of the campaign book Broken Realms Teclis that took place in this location. It's also the home base of the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, which is Shyish's, main Iron Fist of Nagash army that enforces his will across basically everywhere that they touch. And lastly, it is the Shyish Nadir, which is just off screen from any map that we can really see, but that is a central point of Nagash's power. It's the huge moat of death magic that saw Radjikar, rise to such power that he could seize control of the city. All that to say, it's not quite like another Games Workshop game is Warhammer Underworlds, and when that game launched, it took place in the city of Shadespire, which was a really cool, interesting setting, but it was very far off and remote. Like, people had to have a very specific lore reason to go there. And that was always kind of a problem for me, because it just didn't make sense for every faction to want to go there for some reason. But here, there are so many massive, setting-defining events happening in this particular region of Shyish that I feel like they could really bring anything into it, and it would make perfect sense. There are reasons why any army would want to tread on this ground, and that I think that goes a long way to being like, yes, I'm excited for expansions, I'm excited to learn more about it and how they fit into the greater narrative of the area, all that kind of stuff. One thing I also want to note is that the city feels fairly fleshed out, right? It has a culture and identity. A lot of the culture and stuff, you can borrow ideas from the City of Sigmar models, because the founders of it were Azurite from Azir, and so you're going to have a lot of the same aesthetics and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of it that's very translatable, but it just looks, from all the artwork that we have, it has different districts and little lore about all of them, which I will cover in time. And overall, the story of these specific characters and how this huge place was laid low is ultimately very fascinating to me. Now, coming up, like I said, I want to do lore videos on the characters, the good in one video, the bad in another, along with information about more specific locations within the city as they are revealed to us. I'm so excited for this game, and soon I'll be playing it online with y'all, but tell me this. What are you most excited about for it? For me personally, just to kind of show my cards here, I love trying to piece together what happened here before the current setting, right? When I play games like Fallout or something like that, I like looking at abandoned homes and artifacts and trying to see okay, based on where, to pull another phrase, where the cards landed, how do I put together this tale or drama of how things came to be the way that they are? And I'll be doing that along with all of you as we dive into Warhammer Quest Cursed City. So thank you all so much for watching and listening. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will chat with you there. Happy wargaming.